Hey, it's Robbie McCarty with Patriot Crawl Space Repairs. What I want to go over in today's video is how Hampton Roads crawl spaces are different from a lot of the other regions in Virginia. So when it comes to the Hampton Roads region, what we call it in the crawl space arena is a coastal region. So why that matters when you're looking at the Southeast, which is where most of the crawl space work in the country takes place, is along the coast you have a lot of flat lands with high water tables, not a lot of pitch to the terrain. So from Delaware down to coastal Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, the land's really flat along the coast, and again the water table fluctuates a lot and can rise throughout the year. So the reason that's important when it comes to crawl spaces versus other regions is that if you're in the hills or the mountains, when you look at a crawl space, number one, you don't have to worry so much about the water table. You're in an extremely elevated area. You may have to worry about water flow in terms of flooding or things like that, but you don't have to worry about the water table rising around your entire foundation. Also, in the more hilly regions like Richmond or even in the mountains, when you go into a crawl space, it's very clear as to where any water that enters that space is going to go. So typically, the crawl space is kind of on a hill, and you can see that the water, if water enters that space, is all going to collect at one bottom section. So it makes it a lot easier to determine how to handle moisture in that space. Most of the time you can just put one sump pump at the bottom, and any water that comes in, you have a sump pit surrounded by gravel at the low point, and it'll find that pump, and then you can go ahead and encapsulate the rest of the space with a liner. Also, in those higher elevation crawl spaces, there's a lot more actual room in the crawl space. So a lot of them you can actually walk inside. So it becomes a lot more practical to put a fully sealed liner in the crawl space. Number one, you can clean it, and number two, you know that you're where any water that enters that space is going to end up. Also, in these more roomy, higher crawl spaces, you may even store things in there like kayaks or tubes for going on the river or whatever. In Hampton Roads, by contrast, most of the crawl spaces are really low. So most of the crawl spaces in our region, you can't even crawl on your hands and knees around the entire crawl space. You have to military crawl or roll. And the reason that that's important is that there's a lot of companies that have taken crawl space methods from the hill or mountain regions, like full crawl space liners, and just put them in Hampton Roads without analyzing whether they're the best for coastal crawl spaces. And in a coastal environment, when you put a full liner in the crawl space without proper drainage, without a sump pump, then you have no idea whether groundwater is going to rise under that liner at a later date. And if that does happen, then the entire underside of that liner is likely to mold, and you have a huge mold infestation in the crawl space that starts smelling inside your home, and you have to rip out that whole project. So that can be a big issue. Also, there's a lot more termite activity. It's a much larger threat in the wet coastal environments. So when we're looking at low Hampton Roads crawl spaces, most of the time our company, we recommend a pinned liner versus a sealed up the wall vapor barrier. There's a few reasons for that. Number one is, unless you're installing a full perimeter drain inside the crawl space with a sump pump, which you may not even need, but unless you're doing that, then you're at risk for having flooding under that liner or mold under that liner in the future. Number two is that we don't have hills up against the sides of the homes, so moisture coming through the sidewalls isn't as big of a threat versus if you're in the mountains or an area like Richmond, where you may have one side of the yard that's 4 feet above the actual foundation wall of the crawl space. So you actually want to seal the liner up against that wall just so moisture doesn't evaporate into the space. So there's a reason for doing it. Secondly, when you put a fully sealed, say $10,000 liner into a crawl space in Hampton Roads, you can't clean it, you can't service it properly. In reality, inspectors aren't going to cut it open and inspect around the wall. So with the pin liner, being that there is no low point in the crawl space that we know is going to be the area that water collects if there's an issue, the entire perimeter of the crawl space becomes a danger zone. So we want to be able to pull the vapor barrier back and inspect and see around where the foundation wall meets the ground. In case you do have an issue in the future, we can pinpoint it and correct it, versus having that sealed liner, which I equate to sealing the hood of your car shut. It's great on day one, but on year two, you may have issues. You're not going to store things in the crawl space in Hampton Roads. So we want to, in coastal regions, and this is pretty much agreed upon in crawl space science, even with the big research institutions. In coastal regions, you want to maintain inspectability and durability of that space versus trying to get a perfect seal on the liner. For one, the ground is not where most of the moisture is coming from in our region. It's coming in through the crawl space vents in the form of humidity. And if you do have a groundwater issue, then you don't want it sitting under the plastic. You want to put in a drain and sump pump or correct that issue, however you're going to do it, before putting plastic over top of it. So those are some of the things that when we're talking about coastal regions, not just in Virginia, but through the Carolinas, Georgia, down to Florida, even Alabama and Louisiana, the how you treat those crawl spaces in reality from a field experience standpoint, a pest control and mold prevention standpoint is just different than crawl spaces that are high in hilly and mountainous regions, where it's a lot more beneficial to have a liner sealed around the walls and the piers and everything. So I hope that gives you a good idea of what we're thinking about when we look at crawl spaces in Hampton Roads, and how we look at it a little more from a long-term durability and practicality standpoint than some of the encapsulation sales companies. If you'd like me to take a look at your home, I'd be happy to come out, see if there's any issues and whether we have any recommendations. Again, my name's Robbie McCarty with Patriot Crawl Space Repairs. Thanks again for watching, and make it a great day.